Welcome to Black Nouveau. This is our edition for February 4th, 2015. I'm Joanne Williams. Actress Marty Goebel joins us with an excerpt from No Child, the one-woman play she's performing at the Next Act Theater. Nate Hamilton will be here to discuss his family's efforts to get justice for his brother Dontre Hamilton. And we'll preview some of the PBS special programs for African American History Month. During the modern civil rights era of the 1960s, the FBI put itself at the center of the civil rights struggle.
He's got supporters. Detroit, New York, Los Angeles, inciting large-scale arrests and sympathy marches.
I'm very aware of that, Mr. Hoover. What I do know is he's nonviolent. What I need to know right now, what's Martin Luther King about to do next?
Mr. President, Dr. King is here.
As that clip from Selma indicates, the FBI became an adversary rather than a protector of civil rights. Our guest, Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly, researched that experience in his book called Racial Matters, the FBI's Secret File on Black America from 1960 to 1972. That's a pretty long period, so why did you cover that era?
Because that's the heyday of the civil rights movement. Back after the Civil War, we had Reconstruction, and that's Humpty Dumpty time, putting the Union back together after the Civil War. But the North, the United States, Republicans up north bailed out of Reconstruction in 1877, and that left the South, the white South, to do what it wanted regarding the freedmen, and that's the era when Jim Crow comes in, de jure, legal racial segregation. Ku Klux Klan, lynching, disenfranchisement, blacks lose voting rights. And so you go 100 years in the future, another name for the civil rights movement of Martin Luther King's time is the Second Reconstruction. And he needed to finish the job. And the focal point on both Reconstruction after the Civil War in the 60s, the focal point on both is voting rights, like the movie emphasizes.
You cover 1960 to 1972, but you also say the FBI started in 1908?
Yeah.
Right at the beginning, it wasn't a friend of black Americans.
Well, it's a little more complex than that. A grandnephew of Napoleon created the FBI, Attorney General Charles Bonaparte, and he was Teddy Roosevelt's guy, Teddy Roosevelt's Attorney General. And they actually created the FBI for a good reason. There's a problem called peonage, which is it's not like chattel slavery like you had in Mississippi before the Civil War, but it's a form of bonded labor. For example, a black man in the South gets arrested for vagrancy, and he's hauled before the court and given a fine, and if he has no money, he can't pay the fine, so maybe his labor is bound out to a turpentine camp owner or a cotton plantation, and he has to work off the fine. But each day he works, he has to pay his room and board, and so the fine gets bigger. So it's a racket, and it's called peonage. And that is one of the big reasons Teddy Roosevelt and Charles Bonaparte, the Attorney General, started the FBI, to attack that problem. But then, it's very slippery, very quickly. The FBI's first big case is a Mann Act case, a White Slave Traffic Act case against Jack Johnson, the first African-American heavyweight boxing champion of the world. And because of Jack Johnson, you end up with two federal laws. The Mann Act, because Jack Johnson's girlfriend, his fiancée actually, was a white woman. And so the Congress made it a federal crime to transport a white woman across state line for immoral purposes. And that was aimed at Jack Johnson. And the other thing was Congress made it a federal crime to transport stolen prize-fight films across state lines because they didn't want to see a black man beating up great white hopes.
But wasn't the FBI supposed to be investigating things and finding out things that were going on that were against the law, and then telling law enforcement that they should make changes?
Yeah, to understand the FBI in its scope, two sets of three. The first set of three is CCC. The FBI investigates crime, communism, and civil rights. The second set of three things to understand if you're looking at the FBI is what the FBI actually does. They investigate violations of federal law. And in the civil rights field, that means violations of federal civil rights law, including what they used to call police brutality and what they call today unnecessary force. That's part of their mandate. The second thing the FBI does is gather intelligence. And in the civil rights field, that means they're going to be spying on Martin Luther King, but they're also going to be spying on Black America as a community, what I call in the book community surveillance. In other words, yeah, Martin Luther King gets a lot of attention, but so does every other black man and woman, child in the nation. In other words, it's generic community surveillance. And then the third thing the FBI does is counterintelligence, and that's harassment, manipulation, dirty tricks, and sometimes that can get violent, and sometimes people actually died as indirect results of counterintelligence operations.
It sounds like the FBI isn't always on the side of Americans.
Well, that's the tricky part, because which America are you talking about? The FBI's image of itself is it's as American as apple pie. And in that first set of three things I told you, crime, communism, civil rights, everybody loves the FBI in two of those areas, because the FBI's enemies are criminals and communists. And so liberals support the FBI, conservatives, Republicans, Democrats. But it's in that third area, civil rights, where things broke down for the FBI. Because if the FBI investigates civil rights violations aggressively, the white South is in uproar. And if the FBI doesn't investigate aggressively, liberals up north are in an uproar.
Is that why they tried to connect Martin Luther King with communists?
Well, that's J. Edgar Hoover's pet peeve, and that's standard procedure. Anything the FBI doesn't like, they try to smear it as communist. You see cartoon versions of that today, where Barack Obama is a Muslim card-carrying radical Islamic terrorist. That type of attitude, but people see that almost as a joke today. But back then, calling King a communist is deadly serious.
What's the relevance of this book today?
Well, obviously, today we still have many of the same problems. You still have community surveillance, and today it's even broader. You have community surveillance today of all Americans, not just black Americans, with NSA programs and those massive vacuum cleaner intercept programs, which, by the way, defeat the purpose. If you suck up too much intelligence, like every phone call in America, well, how can you find what's important? It's like you're hiding a needle in a haystack of needles, and so it defeats its own purpose. But also, a good part of this book deals with a problem of, again, to use the old-fashioned term, police brutality. And of course, that is extremely relevant today, because you have what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Staten Island, where you're having unarmed, not always, but often African-American young men being killed by the police.
Well, thank you very much. Kenneth O'Reilly, who's written this book called Racial Matters, the FBI's secret file on Black America through 1960 to 1972, but as you've told us, it still goes on today. Thanks for talking with us.
It's great being here. Thank you.
Trouble in mind, I'm blue, but I won't be blue always, because the sun is gonna shine on my back door someday. You hear that? Silence, pure silence. The kind of silence you can only get by spending time in the backwoods. Now, we ain't in the backwoods, though. I'm thinking about retiring there. It is 8:04 a.m., just 5 minutes before the start of the day, and we are on the second floor of Malcolm X High in the Bronx, USA. Now, over there is my janitor's closet, and to the right of that is the girls' bathroom, where the smell of gossip, makeup, and hair pomade fills the air on this bright, shiny morning. Over there is Miss Kennedy's room. She's the principal. For 17 years, she's been in charge of this group of juvenile delinquents, excuse me, academically and emotionally challenged youth. She got a lot to work with. 17 feet below my very own lay over $100,000 worth of security equipment. That's 2 metal detecting machines, 7 metal detecting wands, 5 security guards, and 3 New York City police officers, all armed. Only thing we missing is the bomb-sniffing dog. Now, right back there is Miss Tam's room. She's a new teacher. You used to be an associate at the largest investment firm in New York City, and then coming home one day after a long, dreary day of work, she saw an ad. You know the ones. They promise you a lifetime full of glorious meaning and purpose if you just become a New York City school teacher. Uh-huh. The Devil's Lair on the IRT. Now, I like Miss Tam. She's kind and docile, but I don't think she know what she got herself into. You see, I've been working here since 1958, and I've seen a lot of teachers come and go. I said, I've seen a lot of teachers come and go. I'm gonna say it one more time for good luck. I've seen a lot of teachers come and go. And I do believe that it is the hardest job in this whole wide world. It is the most underpaid, underappreciated, underpaid jobs in this whole crazy universe. But for some miracle of God, every year there are folks that are born knowing that this is what they're going to do with the rest of their life. God, ain't he something? Now you might say to yourself, Jackson Barron Copefield III, what you doing up there on that stage? You ain't no actor. Now this I know. And neither are these kids you about to meet. You are about to see a story about a play within a play within a play. And a teacher, or a teaching artist, as she likes to call herself, just so folks know she does something else in her free time. The kids are going to call her Miss Sun. And in about 2 minutes, she's going to walk up those stairs, past my janitor's closet, and into Miss Tam's room. Now, she going to be something these kids ain't never seen before. Now, you might say to yourself, Barron, I know about the public school system. I watch Eyewitness News. You know what I got to say to that? Hush, 'cause you don't know. Hush, 'cause you don't know unless you are here on a daily basis. Hush, you don't know unless you are a student, teacher, administrator, or a part of the custodial staff. Hush, 'cause you could learn something. Now here's lesson number 1. Taking the 6 train in only 18 minutes from 59th Street, located in one of the richest congressional districts in the nation, you can get all the way to Brook Avenue, where Malcolm X High is, located in one of the poorest congressional districts in the nation. In only 18 minutes. Hush.
That's a scene from No Child. It's at the Next Act Theater through February 22nd. Marty Goebel plays all 16 characters in the play. You must get tired.
I do get tired, physically and mentally, but it is just a lovely ride, and the audience, of course, makes it much more pleasurable than if I was just playing to an empty room.
Well, absolutely. Well, what's the play about?
The play is about the public school system, specifically focusing on the No Child Left Behind initiative and how the testing and accountability laws failed and kind of were disservice to a lot of our children, educators, Board of Ed people, parents, teachers, all of that.
Why did you want to do this play? Why do you think it's important?
I think it's important because Milwaukee Public Schools has certainly been going through its up and downs as far as I've seen since my 4 children have been in the public school system. And I think it kind of takes the burden off of the students to perform in a situation where they're not being supported in the best way, and puts it on the administrators and the powers that be to make sure that they're getting the things that they deserve. And the focus of it is arts integration.
Do you play administrators? You play a janitor? You play students? You play teachers?
I play a grandmother, yeah.
How do you play 16 people all by yourself?
It really takes a director that is speaking to me and working with what I physically offer. There's a lot of dialects, so I've worked with a dialect coach. Just simple, clear movements so that the audience knows who they're looking at, because essentially it is just me.
So you're talking to yourself, but it's not really you. You're talking to another person, and then you become the other person and talk back?
Yes. and see the classroom. And that's a huge thing. I have to actually see them, even when I'm being them.
Does it get confusing?
Yes. But that's what the rehearsal process is for. And we spend 3.5 weeks just making sure that all of that is nice and solid before I get in front of people.
What do you want people to take away from this?
I want them to take away that arts integration is incredibly important for our children, and there are a lot of parallels that can be drawn through not only contemporary plays, but classic plays that can help them tease out things for their own lives. Arts integration, theater, of course, is my focus, is incredibly important, and funding should not be cut in those areas.
Okay, 16 characters in one woman. Marty Goebel, thanks for coming and talking with us.
Thank you for having me.
Last year's death of Dontre Hamilton in Red Arrow Park ignited community protests and outrage. To discuss what happens next, we were joined by Dontre's brother, Nate Hamilton, and Jonathan Safran, the Hamilton family attorney, and Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel columnist, James Causey. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Where are we now as far as the federal investigation? Is it moving forward? Can we expect some sort of results?
Well, we had a meeting approximately a week or so ago with the family, the attorneys, the U.S. attorney, and some of the FBI agents. So we know that that investigation has begun. We anticipate it will take a few months, but at least it has started now.
Well, we just received 1,000 documents that came out that discuss what happened with your brother in the shooting. Can you fill the public in on who your brother was and explain to us what we don't know about your brother?
Well, I say he was that individual who wanted to be a better person, who wanted to work, who wanted to provide for himself, and eventually make himself available to help the family achieve their goals. He worked alongside of me doing roofing work. He was a man who took care of his own personal business. He didn't have to be babysitted. He was a strong individual within himself. I think the paranoid schizophrenia, it was something that he was dealing with, trying to work through, trying to understand, and we supported him in those efforts of trying to understand, trying to make him feel better about who he was. But I think with it hitting him at about the age of 26, 27, where it really started affecting him, he was still like not really, like believing that this was really happening. Us as a family didn't understand what was happening, and we're a faithful family.
Nate, tell me a little bit about the circumstances that led to Dontre's death. Everybody's heard about it, but they may not know all the circumstances, and you know more about it now.
Yeah, it started with a phone call. I talked to him maybe 30 minutes before his death actually happened. And we were supposed to, meet up, and he was supposed to come by my house. He told me he was at the park. So I said, I'll be home in about 15 minutes, meet me at the house. So I was expecting him to come to the house. But the unfold of 2 officers approaching Dontre, initially having a 5-minute dialogue with him, finding out that he wasn't a threat to himself or others, and then returning and telling Starbucks to stop calling, it basically showed us the character of Dontre that we know. He was that person that would talk to you, be respectful of you. We were raised to have manners of elders and authority figures. So that really was clear to me that, yeah, that was my brother. But when Christopher Manny approached Dontre, it had to be an agitation for Dontre to go outside of character or to feel like he had to defend himself. We look at this as Dontre defending himself from an officer who was violating his constitutional rights.
Christopher Manning goes before the Fire and Police Commission in February sometime to get his job back. If he gets his job back, what will that say to your family in the city of Milwaukee?
It will say that the laws are set up to protect officers. They are set up to not be detailed about the incident that happened that day. We feel like there's so much information within these findings, within this investigation, and I feel like the district attorney should have did his job better and evaluated all the statutes leading up to Dontre's death.
From your point of view, if Officer Manny is reinstated, what does that say legally?
Well, I guess there's 2 parts to this. Again, he's been terminated, but he's also applied for duty disability. The concern with getting his job back at all would be if Christopher Maney claims now he's suffering from significant post-traumatic stress disorder. Why or how should that be an individual that we would want to have back on the force acting as a police officer? That's the one issue that we got. Second issue is obviously he's been terminated because of a rule and policy violation, which was this pat-down search that he did that was improper. The chief has been quite clear and the department has been quite clear as to why they terminated him, what he did wrong. If he got his job back, that would seem to indicate that he didn't do anything wrong, and that would seem to throw the whole policy and procedures of the Milwaukee Police Department into flux. So we'd certainly hope that's not going to happen.
Do we have a training issue in Milwaukee with the Milwaukee Police Department and the public, or is it something else?
Well, it's a complicated issue. Just looking at the pat-down search that he was terminated for, after that, if you remember now, we've had the rank and file that have come out with a no confidence vote, but many of those officers have claimed now that they would have done the same type of pat-down search and that they did it all the time. That's where I have a bit of a problem here. Either there's a training problem or there's a communication problem. There is something going on in the department. That's just part of the issues that we see in Milwaukee. There's been a question about this pattern and practice investigation. That's a concern we have.
Is this new? Have you seen incidents before that raise the red flags that we need some changes in the Milwaukee Police Department when it comes to training?
We have a number of cases going on. We have the strip search cases going on, those body cavity search cases. That seems to be a training or policy issue. We had what happened with Darius Simmons' mother in the back of the squad car. Seems to be a training or communication issue. This has been going on for a long time. They're just different things, but it does beg the question, is it more of a fundamental or a systemic problem within the department, or is it just isolated officers? I'm not quite clear. I believe the majority of officers are good, but there's certainly some that need either retraining or shouldn't continue as officers in the department.
Nate, you mentioned something about a new civil rights movement that needs to take place right here in the city, and you're leading the way. Can you explain what that new civil rights movement will look like, feel like, sound like?
It's, the people have sat down and not really used their voices, not spoke out and said how they're hurt and how they're feeling. And the new civil rights movement is to empower people to use their voices, to come together, to unite, to fight against these policies, these procedures that we don't feel necessarily works for the community, don't necessarily gets us justice. Like, we should be able to understand what justice look like. In Milwaukee, we haven't seen justice for police shootings. We haven't seen justice in the economical, level. So it's like we're looking to get a community that says, hey, no more will we stand here, will we sit down and not pay attention to our public officials.
What do you think justice will look like in your brother's case? What will you be able to say when it's all said and done, something has been achieved?
The first thing is we're hoping and praying for the indictment of Christopher Maney on a federal level at this point. But the change that ensues from just this piece happening, for Dontre losing his life, we want to see real change. We want to see real community togetherness. And I think that's the victory that will succeed anything. It will help the families of Derek Williams, the family of Darius Simmons, when they see a community standing up and saying, hey, we support each other. We're going to not turn our backs on our community, but we're going to make sure that our city officials, our mayors, our district attorneys are doing their job. And they care about the people when doing so.
Now, you reached out to Jesse Jackson, your family has, and you also reached out to the suburban community. Can you explain to me how those two things go together?
Well, the suburban community is the community that we really want to understand the black community, build the relationships, create the trust and the respect level that's been lacking so much in Wisconsin, period. So if we can touch the suburban area and get them to understand what we go through on a day-to-day basis, that it's unsafe not only in our communities, but when we drive through the suburban communities, we are afraid to be pulled over. We don't understand what's going to happen in Waukesha and Pewaukee. And at the same time, we're scared of the police in Milwaukee. So everywhere we go, we are in fear of police involvement.
Mr. Safran, what would be justice in your mind from your point of view?
Well, we agree that it would be appropriate that there would be federal criminal charges issued in this case under the civil rights laws. It's unfortunate that often civil rights attorneys are forced in a position that we have to be the ones pursuing the justice and having the accountability. That's a decision that we make as far as pursuing cases, but it would be good for the community and certainly for the Hamilton family if the justice they get was justice that really reached out from the prosecutors of really determining that there had been a wrong committed. That's what we're hoping for.
Well, I thank you both for coming on today, and thank you, James. James Causey from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Jonathan Safran, who's the attorney for Nate Hamilton. Thank you very much for coming on and talking with us today.
Thank you.
An issue that we will follow and see how things unfold in Milwaukee in the next few months. Before we close tonight, here's a reminder of some of the special programs Milwaukee Public Television is airing this month. Within the next week, you can watch American Masters, Jimi Hendrix, and search for Josiah Henson, the man behind the story of Uncle Tom's Cabin. And on the stage here in Milwaukee, the Skylight Music Theater is performing Once on This Island, starring Sherry Williams Pennell.
And it's the story of a young girl who falls in love with a person who is not of her class, and even more important, not of her same skin color. And I mean within the race. This is colorism. So she is a dark-skinned girl who falls in love with a light-skinned young man, a grand homme, a beautiful man, from the other side of the island.
Once on This Island runs through February 22nd at the Skylight. And that's our program for this week. For Black Nouveau, I'm Joanne Williams. Thanks for watching.